Welcome in, everybody, ready to dive into the righteous mind. We're going to be unpacking Jonathan Haidt's work on morality, and I'm very interested to see how it connects to all those political clashes we see everywhere these days.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. I mean, one of the most interesting things about the book is how hate kind of flips our assumptions about morality on their head. Like, we tend to think our moral judgments are, based on logic and reason, but he argues that actually intuition and emotion play a much bigger role.
And he uses a really vivid analogy to illustrate this point, right? The rider and the elephant.
Yeah, exactly. The Rider and the Elephant. It's a classic. Picture your mind like a rider on an elephant. Okay, so the elephant, that represents your gut feelings, your instincts, and that's the one who's really in control. It's driving your moral decisions. And the rider, that's like your conscious reasoning, just trying to keep up and make sense of where the elephant's going.
So basically, it sounds like you're saying our emotions have a head start in the morality race.
Yeah, you could say that.
It's interesting because it makes me think about those times when I've had like a strong, immediate reaction to something even before I could fully explain why I felt that way.
Exactly. And according to Haidt, that's your elephant at work. He says that our moral judgments are often driven by those quick, intuitive responses rather than by, careful deliberation.
Interesting. So if our elephants are kind of calling the shots here, how does that explain why people have such different moral compasses, especially when it comes to something like politics?
Right, and that's where Haidt's six moral foundations come into play. He argues that these foundations are like universal moral taste buds, if you will.
Moral taste buds. Okay, I like
Yeah,
that.
they influence how we perceive right and wrong.
Okay, so what are these foundations?
All right, so there's care harm, fairness cheating, loyalty betrayal, authority subversion, sanctity degradation, and liberty oppression.
Six foundations. Wow. Okay, so that's quite a framework. But how do these foundations help explain our political differences, which is what we were talking about earlier?
So Haidt found that while everyone recognizes these moral foundations to some degree, liberals and conservatives tend to prioritize them differently. So for example, he suggests that liberals tend to place a higher value on care harm and fairness cheating, leading them to advocate for social justice and equality.
So liberals are driven by a sense of empathy and a desire for a level playing field. That makes sense. So what about conservatives? How do their moral foundations shape their worldview?
Well, while conservatives also value care and fairness, they place a stronger emphasis on things like loyalty betrayal, authority subversion, and sanctity degradation. And this might lead them to favor things like strong national defense, traditional values, and respect for authority.
So both groups are drawing from these universal moral foundations, but they're just emphasizing different ones.
Yeah, and it's not that one side lacks certain morals, it's more about which morals they prioritize.
Right.
And, that's a key insight from Haidt's research. It helps explain why certain political debates can feel so intractable, because people might be talking past each other, appealing to different moral foundations without even realizing it.
That's so interesting because I'm starting to see how this could explain why some arguments just go in circles. You know what I mean? If someone's arguing from a place of care and fairness and the other person is focused on loyalty and authority, they're essentially speaking different moral languages.
Precisely, yeah. And this highlights the importance of understanding these moral foundations if we want to have more, I don't know, productive conversations about politics and other potentially divisive issues. It's not about trying to change anyone's morals, it's about recognizing where they're coming from.
So we need to develop a kind of moral literacy,
Yeah,
an ability to recognize and understand the different values that are at play in these discussions.
exactly. And this leads us to another fascinating aspect of Haidt's work, his exploration of our groupish nature.
Okay, groupish nature. Tell me more. I have a feeling I can relate to that.
Well, Haidt argues that humans are inherently social creatures. We're wired to belong to groups and find meaning in these collective identities. Think about things like sports fans, religious communities, even those online groups dedicated to specific hobbies or interests.
It's almost like we have this like primal need to find our tribe.
Exactly, and Haidt believes that this groupishness is deeply rooted in our evolutionary past.
Ooh.
Think about our ancestors, right? Those who could cooperate in groups, who could trust and rely on each other, they were more likely to survive and pass on their genes.
So you're saying it's not just like a social quirk or something. It's woven into our very DNA.
Precisely. And while this, groupishness can lead to great things like cooperation and solidarity, it also has a downside.
Okay.
Yeah, it can make us susceptible to things like tribalism, prejudice, us versus them thinking.
Yeah, it makes me think of all those heated online debates that happen where people seem more interested in like scoring points for their side than actually understanding each other.
A perfect example, yeah. We can become so invested in our group identities that we lose sight of the bigger picture of our shared humanity.
So how do we reconcile this? Because on the one hand, we need to belong, it's part of who we are, but we also need to find ways to bridge those divides, connect with people who see the world differently. How do we do both?
That's the challenge, isn't it? And it's something that Haidt addresses directly in The Righteous Mind. He argues that understanding these moral foundations and our groupish nature is the first step towards bridging those divides. It's about recognizing that even when we disagree strongly, we're still all navigating these same moral landscapes driven by the same fundamental human needs.
So it's more about seeing people with different opinions, not as enemies to be defeated, but like fellow travelers on this journey of trying to understand the world.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that diversity of thought, diversity of experience can actually enrich our understanding. It's about moving away from us versus them and embracing the idea of we.
This is giving me like a whole new perspective on how to approach those difficult conversations. You know, instead of digging in my heels and just trying to convince the other person that I'm right, maybe I should try to actually understand their perspective, understand the values that are driving their beliefs.
Yeah, that's a powerful shift in thinking, and it's something that Haidt really advocates for. He calls it moral humility, the recognition that our own moral intuitions are not infallible and that other people might have valid perspectives even if we don't agree with them.
I really like that, moral humility. It kind of takes the pressure off needing to be right all the time and opens up the possibility of, you know, genuine dialogue, understanding.
Absolutely. And it's not just about intellectual understanding. Haidt emphasizes the importance of empathy, of trying to see the world through the other person's moral lens, to understand what values, what experiences have shaped their worldview.
It's almost like putting on a different pair of glasses and seeing the world from a whole new perspective.
Exactly. And this doesn't mean you have to abandon your own values or beliefs. It's about expanding your understanding, recognizing that there are multiple ways of seeing the world and that even those who hold very different views might be driven by good intentions.
That's interesting. It's making me think of conversations I've had with family members who have different political views.
Mm.
Sometimes it feels like we're speaking totally different languages.
Mm.
But maybe if I approach those conversations with more moral humility
Yeah.
and I try to understand the values behind their positions, maybe we can actually find some common ground.
That's the hope. And it might not always be easy, right? There will be times when those differences feel insurmountable. But I think Haidt's work offers us a powerful framework for navigating those difficult conversations and building bridges across those divides.
It's about remembering that we're all human. We're all struggling with these big questions, and ultimately, we all want the same things: to feel safe, to belong, to make sense of the world around us.
Beautifully said. And that shared humanity is the foundation upon which we can start to build understanding, even when we disagree. It's about recognizing that our differences don't have to define us. They can actually enrich our understanding and make us stronger as a society.
This is a lot to absorb, but it's also incredibly empowering. I feel like I'm starting to see those political divisions not as, these insurmountable obstacles, but as opportunities for growth, for understanding.
That's the power of knowledge, and I think that's what makes The Righteous Mind such an important book, especially in our current climate, right? It offers us a way to understand not just those who hold different political views, but to understand ourselves better.
It's about recognizing the complex interplay of reason, emotion, and group dynamics that shapes our moral judgments and ultimately, influences how we interact with the world.
And that understanding is the first step towards creating a more compassionate, just, and equitable world.
So it sounds like Haidt's work is a call to action. It's a challenge to engage in those difficult conversations, not with a spirit of judgment or condemnation, but with a willingness to listen, to understand, and to find common ground.
Exactly. It's a call to remember our shared humanity and to use that as a foundation for building a better future together.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I've gained a whole new set of tools for understanding myself and the world. But before we wrap up, is there anything else from The Righteous Mind that you think our listeners should know?
I think it's important to highlight one more crucial point that often gets overlooked. Haidt reminds us that while our groupish nature can be a source of division, it can also be a powerful force for good. Throughout history, humans have repeatedly found ways to overcome tribal divisions and build larger, more inclusive societies.
Wow, it feels like we've covered so much ground already in this deep dive into The Righteous Mind. From the rider and the elephant to the six moral foundations and our groupish nature, Haidt really gives us this really fascinating picture of how complex human morality really is.
Yeah, it's such a rich tapestry of ideas, you know? And I think what really struck me is how hate brings together all these insights from psychology, evolutionary biology, even anthropology.
Yeah.
And he uses it to create this really compelling narrative about, who we are and why we do the things we do.
Yeah, and it's not just some abstract academic thing. It feels so relevant to the stuff we're dealing with in the world today,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to, all these political divisions that seem impossible to solve.
Exactly. And I think one of the most valuable takeaways from The Righteous Mind is that we can't just reason our way out of these disagreements, you
Mhm.
know? Like our moral judgments are so tied up with our emotions, our group identities, that intuitive sense of right and wrong we were talking about before.
So it's not enough to just throw facts and figures at people. We have to understand those deeper psychological and social forces that are at play.
Absolutely. And that's where this concept of moral humility becomes so important. It's about understanding that our own moral intuitions aren't perfect and that other people might have valid points of view, even if we don't agree with them.
It's about not immediately judging and being more curious and open when we have those conversations.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean we have to abandon what we believe in. It's more about understanding that there are many ways to see the world, and that even those who have very different views might be coming from a good place.
Right. It's about accepting that complexity
Great.
and not oversimplifying things or demonizing those who don't agree with us.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's where hate offers us this little bit of hope. He's not saying that these differences will just vanish, but he is saying that if we can understand the deeper reasons behind morality, then maybe we can start to overcome these divisions and create a society that's based on compassion and understanding.
It's about remembering that we're all human, and that connects us even when we disagree.
Precisely, and that can be so powerful, realizing that. It lets us see those who think differently not as enemies, but as people just trying to figure things out, just like us.
It's about moving away from judgment and towards understanding, moving away from division towards connection.
That's what it's all about, I think. Hate's work is all about helping us to understand ourselves and each other better so we can make the world a more just, compassionate, and harmonious place.
This has been so eye-opening, really. I feel like I've gotten these new insights into not just morality, but into what it means to be human.
That's great to hear. And for everyone listening, I really encourage you to keep learning about this stuff. Pick up The Righteous Mind and explore these ideas more deeply. I think you'll find it really rewarding.
Yeah, and this isn't the end of the conversation, right? Take what you've learned, talk to others about it, and let's keep exploring these important ideas together.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.